to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not just older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Welcome to a special edition of the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast, where today we're rolling out the red carpet for an exclusive Oscars preview that promises to be as captivating as the ceremonies themselves. I'm Paul Vogelzang. Our guest today, who will be guiding us through a wonderful evening about the Oscars, is a returning favorite, Smithsonian Associate, well-known film critic, Noah Gittell. Noah Gittell works for The Atlantic, The Ringer, and BBC, among many others, as we gear up for the Academy Awards on March 10th, celebrating the pinnacle of cinematic achievements from the past year. We dive deep into the heart of Oscars season, unpacking the surprises, the snubs, and the sheer spectacle of the race to those coveted golden statuettes. Noah Gittell will be presenting at Smithsonian Associates coming up, so please check out our notes today for more details. But we have Noah Gittell today. He is here to share his insider's look at the Oscars. Of course, he is a returning guest and so much the favorite with our audience here at Smithsonian Associates. We are going to learn about the intricacies of the Academy Awards, all the history, the trivia. We're going to have this wonderful, discerning discussion with Noah Gittell on this year's most talked about nominations and performances. With an evening that illuminates the backstage stories, the rumors, and the gossip, Noah Gittell will share a little bit with us today, but more at the Smithsonian Associates presentation, so that all will be assured that you will be the most enlightened guest at any Oscar party. So join in with us today. Check out our show notes for more information about Noah Gittell coming up at Smithsonian Associates. So whether you've already picked your favorites or you're keen to hear about expert insights on this year's contenders, from the groundbreaking to the controversial, I've got my favorites. I love Holdovers. I loved American Fiction. And of course, Killers of the Flower Moon are my top three. So join us for this unforgettable journey at the heart of the Oscars. This is the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series, with a special edition about our celebration of the art of cinema and the stories that shape our world, making every moment count. So please stay tuned. Noah Gittell, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Always a pleasure.
Yep, always great to talk to you too. I love movies, and I know you do, and so we always have a really great conversation. Oscars, Academy Awards coming up. You and I catch up with each other about this same time each year. I have to say, this is an interesting year for Oscars. There's so many great films, and I just want to jump right into this because there have been some surprises, some upsets, and I wonder how you're going to weave all that together with your Smithsonian Associates presentation, because my bet is it's going to be an exciting presentation from you with everything going on.
Well, the thing that's really fascinating about the Oscars, and to me, the thing that keeps me hanging on, watching every ceremony every year and following the storylines throughout the year, is that sometimes the Oscars get it incredibly right, and sometimes they get it mind-bogglingly wrong. They pick movies that you just know we're not going to be talking about in 5 or 10 years. So it's really this snapshot of this moment in time, these films selected by a group of film artists who, many of them have nothing in common, everything from agents to Hollywood stars to craftspeople. And it all coalesces into this one night when these choices are made. And, it's a thing that ties Hollywood history together. They've been doing this since 1928. And there's just so many storylines to unpack, so much history to unpack, that it always gives us something to talk about. And for my presentation on March 8th, I'm going to go over the history of the awards, the origin of the awards, which I think are very instructive in terms of how to think about them now. And then all the changes that have happened in the Academy and the ceremony itself over the last decade or so, which play a major role in some of these nominations. So, as you know, no shortage of stories to delve into.
Right. We're all talking about Barbie. I mean, it is everywhere. We're not big Super Bowl fans here, but we watched and we saw Ryan Gosling in an ad, and of course, he seems to be everywhere. And we're hearing a lot about Maestro. My gosh, we're hearing so much about Paul Giamatti's Eye from Holdovers. Just some great subjects. It all seems to come together, as you say. And the process is an amazing one. So talk to us a little bit about your biggest surprise and maybe some of the most glaring snubs here, because, I mentioned Barbie, and that seems to be on that list.
Yeah, Barbie got a lot of attention on nomination day because Margot Robbie was not nominated in Best Actress and Greta Gerwig was not nominated as Best Director. It should be noted that they were both nominated in other categories. Greta Gerwig was nominated for co-writing the screenplay with her partner, Noah Baumbach. And Margot Robbie was a producer of Barbie, so she gets a Best Picture nomination as well. But those snubs were the source of much controversy. And, I'm of two minds about it. I think it's always worth looking at trends. And Greta Gerwig has now not been nominated Best Director for her last two films, Barbie and Little Women, both of which were nominated for Best Picture. Now, part of that is because 10 films get nominated for Best Picture and only 5 can be nominated for Best Director. So inevitably, some will not make the cut. But there is a trend here. And it has been said that the director's branch is very heavily male, and they've never nominated 2 women in that category at once. Justine Triet for Anatomy of a Fall is nominated this year. And that maybe Gerwig is the object of some male bias here. And when it comes to Robbie, I think what we have to keep in mind here is that Best Actress is a really competitive category. And it has been for quite a while now. When I was a kid, I was growing up in the 80s and 90s. I remember Best Actress was like a category. They had to really kind of stretch to find 5 worthy performances. And often there would be 1 or 2 from a movie nobody had really been talking about. That's not the case anymore. And it really speaks to how the industry has changed and how more women-led films are being made, and unfortunately, Robbie just didn't make the cut there. As far as positive surprises, I think Past Lives getting in Best Picture is a real nice surprise. That was a lovely movie, a very small movie, basically a 3-hander with 3 kind of main characters in it, this love triangle from A24. And A24, the studio, has been great about getting Best Picture nominations the last few years. They had Everything Everywhere All at Once last year, so they clearly know what they're doing. But this little studio got 2 movies in Best Picture, Zone of Interest and Past Lives. And I think both of those movies were sort of right on the cusp. And they're very good, very challenging movies, and I'm glad they both made it.
As much as I enjoyed Killers of the Flower Moon, that was a challenging movie, too. Would you agree? I mean, it ended up with quite a few nominations, but it was a tough movie to watch, especially if you kind of think about what is really going on there with the Osage and our history with American Indians. It was challenging.
Yeah, it was. And Scorsese did not sensationalize any of the violence like he has done in some of his earlier films, which I think was absolutely the right decision. But it does make it kind of a grimmer film to watch. And the length, 3.5 hours, that's a long movie. I've watched it twice now, and that's a whole day of my life.
Right.
It was a day well spent.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of time. I'm not surprised that it got so many nominations. It was a hit at the Cannes Film Festival last May, and Cannes is increasingly becoming a bellwether for Oscar films because it's a very international festival, and the Academy itself is becoming more international. They've made a lot of efforts to add people to the Academy from outside the U.S. And of course, Scorsese is just a legend. His films always get nominated, but The Irishman, his last film, was nominated for 10 awards and it won none. And I think there's a chance the same thing could happen with Killers of the Flower Moon. He's really in this lane where his movies are beloved enough to be nominated, but not necessarily to win too many awards. And I think part of that is because they are so challenging, as you say. They're just not for everybody, and they don't necessarily reassure people. People like movies that make them feel good, and Killers of the Flower Moon, for everything it did well, certainly was not designed to make people feel good.
Yeah, we have in our house some speakers attached to our television. It's not fancy, not really true surround sound, but the music from Killers of the Flower Moon was really incredible. I just loved it. And then Mark Ronson and Ryan Gosling. Yeah, did you enjoy the music too?
Yeah, I absolutely did.
Yeah.
Really popped for me on the second viewing. I thought the score was incredible. And the late Robbie Robertson, it was his last film score from the band, of course, and a longtime collaborator with Scorsese. And I thought it was really effective. It added a lot to the film, a lot of texture.
Wouldn't be an Oscars without some reference to bias that is inherently, a part of all the process, regardless of Oscars or any other, kind of evaluation that we have. There's bias, and I wonder how you see that potentially affecting the nominations in the awards, especially when you look at Barbie and then American Fiction, which was another just fantastic film and a comedy, and comedies typically aren't what the Academy really likes.
You're 100% right. They are typically not what the Academy likes. But if you look at the nominees this year, it's hard to argue that is not changing. Mm-hmm. Because, we could quibble over what a comedy is exactly, but by my count, 4 of the Best Picture nominees are at least partly comedic, and that would be Barbie, The Holdovers, Poor Things, and American Fiction. And I don't have to do any research to tell you that has never happened before. Usually if there's one comedy among the Best Picture nominees, that's a big deal. So I don't know if it's a coincidence. I mean, these are all from really well-established filmmakers, except for American Fiction, of course. But who the Academy has celebrated before. So it might just be a bit of a coincidence that all these filmmakers decided to make a comedy this year, and they did such a great job at it. But as far as I'm concerned, comedy, you'll hear anyone say who's been involved in this sort of thing, that comedy is harder than drama. And I think these films absolutely should be recognized at the Oscars.
Yeah, I got to tell you, and you mentioned Holdovers, and I referred to Paul Giamatti, and I didn't quite know what to expect when watching that movie. I hadn't done a bunch of research before watching it, and as somebody who's 66 years old, many of my audience will relate to this. That film just had the most unbelievable visual impact on me. It took me right back to those days, 1975. I mean, I was there. The film just looks like that period. Mm. What'd you make of that?
I loved it. I mean, I didn't grow up in the 70s, but anybody who loves cinema has to love the films of the 70s, right? So I'm very familiar with that aesthetic. And I loved how he actually had a fake studio card for, I believe it was Focus Features, to make it look like a 70s studio card at the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
Of course, Focus Features did not exist in the 70s, so he made one up. And I thought that was a really cute kind of wink to open the movie. But, Alexander Payne, he's one of these directors who got started in the 90s, grew up in the 70s. People like Paul Thomas Anderson and Quentin Tarantino and Sofia Coppola, that generation reveres the films of the 70s. They were very formative for him. And I think in this film, Payne has spoken about this, but Hal Ashby was a major influence on this movie. Movies like The Last Detail and Harold and Maude, those films, you can really see them in The Holdovers. And I think that's part of what makes it so comforting, is that it's working in this tradition of films that we know and love.
Hi, it's Paul. Do you love entertaining, informative, eclectic, insightful programs about culture, health, science, life, and everything Smithsonian? As part of our Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast, we're introducing you to the new Smithsonian Associates streaming series. Smithsonian, a nonprofit organization, is excited to present this new aspect of their 55 years as the world's largest museum-based educational program. Join us from the comfort of your home as we periodically interview Smithsonian Associate guest speakers. Our audience here on radio and podcast can explore our website for more information, links, and details at notold-better.com. Thanks, everybody. Noah Gittell is our returning guest. Of course, Noah Gittell is a Smithsonian Associate. We'll be presenting at Smithsonian Associates coming up. And the subject of Noah Gittell's upcoming presentation will be A Night at the Oscars. We've talked to Noah Gittell before. It's always so great to connect with you again and talk about movies. I do love watching these films, and it's so nice to kind of review this. We also would be, I think, remiss if we didn't talk for just a moment, Noah Gittell, about the Oscars recognition of social, political themes. I mentioned American Fiction, fantastic movie. I think everybody should see. Rusted is another one that I think is equally impactful when it comes to social and political themes. What's the role that you believe that the Oscars play in kind of, bringing about that conversation, promoting diversity, having some narratives that are about inclusivity in filmmaking?
Well, there's a few things. First of all, if you believe that film in general has anything to contribute to the national discourse on race and gender and other identity issues, then the Oscars most definitely do. Because the Oscars are the only reason serious movies for adults with serious themes get made. Otherwise, Hollywood would just be making superhero movies year-round. But when a movie gets nominated for an Oscar, or really is even in the conversation to be nominated for an Oscar, it gets all this free press, right? I mean, just being nominated is free press because every outlet in the world reports on it, and people who might not know about the movie hear about it, and they get this stamp of approval. And there are still people out there, you and me, for example, who will make an effort to see every nominated movie that we can. And if it weren't for the Oscars, serious movies that grapple with these issues really wouldn't be made at all. But beyond that, the Academy has made an effort to really diversify their membership. It started back in 2016, I believe it was, when this activist April Reign started the Oscars So White campaign. I'm sure everybody remembers that. And it really opened up this long overdue conversation about how the Academy was overly white and overly male and overly older as well. I mean, on this podcast, we're not going to have a complaint at all about there being too many people over a certain age in any institution, but it should be diverse. It should reflect what's going on in the culture now. And the truth is, the way the Academy is set up, which is that you have to be sponsored to get in, and you don't leave until you pass from this earth, inevitably that will lead to more older people being in the Academy. And that was, in some ways, I think, holding the Academy back from reflecting the culture today. So they didn't kick anyone out, because that's not the right thing to do. And, Martin Scorsese is 80 years old. We don't want to kick him out, that's for sure. I'd rather he just decide the Oscars on his own. But they did add a lot of younger people. They added a lot of people of color. They added a lot of women. They added a lot of international members, and they created a more diverse group. And we've seen the results of that over the years. I mean, the year that April Reign started that campaign, there were no actors of color nominated for an Oscar. This year, 7 of the 20 actors nominated are actors of color, and that's just a significant change.
There's certainly been an awful lot of talk on this subject with regard to America Ferrera's performance in Barbie. And that's, I think, challenging, some of Hollywood standards for recognition. I looked at that and just thought, that's a rallying cry. That movie is subtle in a lot of ways, but powerful. And America Ferrera's performance just is really strong. Yeah,
I thought she was great. She's a really important part of the movie. But, the issue to me that's so relevant here is that she is only, I believe, the 10th Latinx actor to ever be nominated, ever, for the Academy Awards in almost 100 years. And it's really rare. And what's even more concerning is that even when a Latina actress, for example, does get nominated, they rarely get the same sort of career bump that a white actor might get. Like, if you look at the list of Latina actresses nominated in the lead category, you see names like Fernanda Montenegro, Catalina Sandino Moreno, Yalitza Aparicio, great actors who get great performances. But when's the last time, a Yalitza Aparicio movie was #1 at the box office? I mean, it just doesn't happen. They don't get the same opportunities. And it's a real problem that I think needs a lot more attention, needs more of a spotlight than it's currently getting. There have been great efforts to increase opportunities for Black actors and actresses. More needs to be done there. More needs to be done for Latinos as well. And I think America Ferrera's nomination is a really great thing. And I think she is very well positioned because she has an established career already to make something of this nomination and have her career go to the next step. And that would be an important thing for Latinx people everywhere.
You do so much to bring this forward, and your upcoming Smithsonian Associates event, with audience voting predictions, and I think that gets everybody excited, and I think it allows us to connect with the Oscars in deeper ways. And so thank you for all of what you're doing, and I wonder if you feel the same about this connection that's established through kind of more participation, more engagement, even kind of coming up with our own voting predictions.
Participation is definitely key. The Academy wants people to feel invested and involved. They want them to care about the movies, first of all, but then I think everybody doing their Oscar pools is a big part of that. I'll say personally, the presentation that I put together every year helps get me excited about the Oscars. On nominations day, good, I'm glad to hear it. And that's what I want for everybody. On nominations day, when we find out what the slate is, I always think, oh God, how am I going to come up with a presentation about these nominations? And then you start thinking about it and you start writing and you think about the trends and you think about the history. And it's just such a rich text that we're dealing with here, 100 years almost of Oscar history and American culture today, which has so many different facets to explore that I think it's important. Thinking about this stuff, writing about this stuff, being involved in Oscar pools, talking to your neighbors, talking to your coworkers. That's the fun part of Oscar night. I mean, the night itself is fun, but all the lead up to it is really where the good stuff is.
Yeah. So on that Tuesday morning when all the nominations were revealed, what did you think about Oppenheimer, and what did you think about Poor Things, and then Killers of the Flower Moon? So kind of all three of those were the leading nomination getters. Were you in agreement with that kind of grouping? Did you feel like, my gosh, this is exactly what I thought?
Well, those are two different questions, and I'll answer them separately. Was I surprised? No, I wasn't surprised at all. Those were perceived to be the front runners really going into the nomination day. And part of that is because we have such a established festival schedule. We sort of know which festivals are the ones that are most likely to produce Oscar nominees at this point: Cannes and Venice and Telluride and Toronto and New York to some degree. But also because, there's so much writing that goes on and so many other award ceremonies that happen before the Oscar nominations, like the Golden Globes and the New York Film Critics and the LA Film Critics Awards. And it just feels like groupthink starts to set in at some point, and we get such a clear idea of who the nominees are going to be, that there are usually very few surprises on the actual nomination day. And I actually think that's something the Academy should look at changing. I don't know if they could move up the nomination period or something like that. I know they want to give everyone time to see everything, but it does take a little bit of the fun out of it if you're one of these people who follows it all closely, because there's not a lot of surprise on that day. When it comes to my own personal preferences, I thought all those movies were very, very good, but I will acknowledge that my tastes this year drifted towards even smaller movies. None of those films made my top 10 of the year. I was really drawn to small, independent, personal films. And in fact, my favorite film of the year was a French film called The Taste of Things that is actually just out in wide release now, but it got a small release, a limited release in December to be eligible for the Oscars. And it was France's submission for Best International Film over Anatomy of a Fall. Yet Anatomy of a Fall got so much love that it got nominated in the big categories, and Taste of Things, which would be eligible for international film, sort of just got lost in the shuffle there. But I think it's a real shame. It's a beautiful movie about food and about love and ephemerality, and I highly recommend people go see it. It's out right now, even though it's not nominated for any Oscars.
And then give us the name again.
It's called The Taste of Things. Juliette Binoche is in it.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, I gotta say, I like that lineup of Oppenheimer and Poor Things, Killers of the Flower Moon. I kind of like some of the, and I mentioned Paul Giamatti from The Holdovers. I really enjoyed that, but I really like Divine Joy Randolph from The Holdovers. I really like Sterling K. Brown from American Fiction, and of course Lily. So that was kind of, I was thinking more as I made my own list. It's a little bit more of an offbeat grouping, and one that I think our audience is going to have to, kind of pay attention to some of these films to really enjoy a performance by someone like Divine Joy Randolph, who's just remarkable in The Holdovers. Paul Giamatti too, but boy, they are quite.
That's so well put. That's so well put, Paul, about Divine Joy Randolph, because that performance is so special because, in part, you have Paul Giamatti and Dominic Sessa, the two leads, really just sort of going at each other the whole movie. Like they're very smart performances, but they're big performances too. Mm-hmm. And she gives this very subtle, almost recessive performance as a woman going through a very complicated thing in her life. And she is a person who can do big. I don't know if you saw Dolomite Is My Name, but she does a musical number with Eddie Murphy that is as big as it gets. Yeah. But here she holds it all back and does something very small. And I think it is really powerful, and it's an absolutely crucial component of this.
Yeah, quite a performance. Looking forward to kind of some of these the categories that are perhaps a little bit unique. Well, I know you're very busy, and we always so appreciate your time, Noah Gittell. Just one final question. Looking back at the history, tell us some of the trivia or historical moments from Oscars that might not typically rise to the top for our Smithsonian Associates audience, but that you've kind of paid attention to over the years.
Well, I'll give you one that I just read in a book called Oscar Wars by Michael Schulman, which I highly recommend to anybody who cares about the Oscars or really just about Hollywood history
Oscar
at
Wars,
all.
Okay.
Yes, by Michael Schulman, and it just came out last year. But in 1957 at the Oscars, a man named Robert Rich won Best Original Screenplay, or it might have been Best Adapted Screenplay, for a film called The Brave One, about a boy who has a bull that he cares about. He's trying to save the bull's life. And the funny thing about Robert Rich, which many people did not realize until Oscar night, is that he did not exist. Nobody knew who Robert Rich was, who had written this film. He didn't show up at the Oscars. They called his name and nobody came to the podium. And it wasn't like today when there's months and months of reporting on all the nominees. So this was more feasible back then. And it did not come out fully until, I think, years later that Robert Rich was actually a pseudonym for the blacklisted screenwriter Dalton Trumbo, who had written the film surreptitiously and given it to his studio friends. But at the time, nobody knew any of this, and there was this big investigation into who is Robert Rich. Turned out it was the name of a nephew of the studio executive. He used the name of this person who had no involvement in the film industry whatsoever. He had no idea the film was going to win an Oscar, and he would get caught. And that's eventually what happened. Trumbo tried to use it to sort of show the absurdity of the blacklist, that he was still making films and that he had to invent a persona to do that. And it may have played some small role in ending the blacklist, but it was a very anomalous moment in Oscars history to give an award to a person that literally does not exist.
Wow. That is really fantastic. Thank you for pulling that one out. That's a great one to know about, because, I, of course, have heard the name Dalton Trumbo, but that's a wonderful, wonderful story. Well, Noah Gittell, it's always so great to talk with you. My best to you always. And we're looking forward to your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. We'll put links so that our audience can find out more about your Smithsonian Associates presentation and all the work that you do. But my best to you. And here's rooting for the Academy and for Oscar night.
Thanks, Paul. I hope everyone enjoys the presentation, and happy Oscars.
My thanks to writer, Oscar historian, well-known film critic, and returning guest Smithsonian Associate Noah Gittell, who'll be presenting at Smithsonian Associates coming up. The title of Noah's presentation is A Night at the Oscars. Please check out our show notes for more information about Noah Gittell and his upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. My thanks to the Smithsonian team for all they do to support the show. My thanks to you, our wonderful audience here on radio and podcast. Please be well, be safe, and let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next week.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast.